Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a new edition of the Daily Debate. In tonight's show, we're going to be focusing on the Egyptian and the presidential efforts exerted within the international community and also in North Africa and the Middle East. First off, President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi is attending the Visegrad Group Summit in Egypt, in Budapest rather, and this is regarding... This summit actually includes Slovakia, Poland, Hungary and also the Czech Republic. Egypt is attending the summit for the second time this year. Now, also, the president earlier today addressed China's UN Biodiversity Summit. We're going to be focusing on that as well, and we're going to be taking an overall look on the Egyptian efforts regarding the regional stability. But before we start doing that, let's check out some of the stories making the news today. And we'll start off with President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, who held talks with his Hungarian counterpart, János Áder, in the Hungarian capital Budapest on Tuesday, which centered on bilateral ties and regional issues of mutual concern, including the war on terrorism and illegal immigration. After their talks, the two presidents held a joint press conference, and during which President el-Sisi hailed the Hungarian efforts to develop the Middle East region. President el-Sisi said the fighting terrorism is crucial to maintaining stability in the region, calling on the world to unite in combating terrorism. On Ethiopia's dam, President Sisi called for reaching an agreement on filling and operating the dam, noting that Egypt seeks to guarantee its share of water. He said Egypt has no other source of water than the Nile River, asserting that Egypt necessitates water for development, not for disputes nor conflicts. For his part, the Hungarian president hailed the relations with Egypt and noted that Egypt is the most important economic partner in the Middle East. He hailed Egypt's role in settling the escalating tensions in the Palestinian Gaza Strip, and the Hungarian leader noted that he and President el-Sisi have probed means of fostering bilateral economic ties. Also, President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi addressed a key UN Biodiversity Summit in China today, and during which he stressed that the world is going through a critical phase that necessitates exerting sincere efforts to face the huge challenges which were aggravated by the coronavirus pandemic at a time when dealing with its negative repercussions is still underway. President el-Sisi thanked China for the keenness on holding this round of the conference despite the challenges facing the multi-party action against the COVID-19 repercussions. In his speech, the head of state also tackled the challenges facing the whole world due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And Chinese President Xi Jinping announced the launch of a 1.5 billion yuan fund on Tuesday to support biodiversity protection in developing countries as talks continue on a new post-2020 global pact to tackle species loss. Xi was virtually addressing the COP15 Biodiversity Summit in Kunming, China, where diplomats, scientists and conservationists are meeting to lay the groundwork for a global agreement to halt and reverse the destruction of nature, set to be finalized in May next year. The Chinese leader said the developing countries need help and support, and solidarity must be strengthened to allow developing countries to benefit in a fairer way. Xi said China's contribution to the Kunming Biodiversity Fund would start at 1.5 billion yuan, which amounts to $232.47 million, and that it would also welcome contributions from other parties. The week-long meeting marks the formal start of a new round of global talks on protecting the world's plants and animals from extinction and preserving the ecosystems they depend on. These were some of the stories making the news today, but starting off with our first topic for tonight, Egypt attending the Visegrad summit for the second time now. The president attended, he addressed it, and there was a joint press conference that was held. Let's check out this report and we'll be right back.
President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi participates in the Visegrad Group summit in Budapest, Hungary. Presidential spokesman Bassem Radi said the summit covers a number of issues, mainly Egypt's role in the Middle East region, cooperation to counter terrorism and illegal migration, as well as energy security, in addition to discussing opportunities to advance trade, investment and tourism relations between the two sides. The summit also tackles means to develop cooperation between Egypt and the European Union, which includes the membership of the V4 countries. The spokesman added that President el-Sisi's visit to Budapest also includes holding bilateral talks with senior Hungarian officials, namely Prime Minister Viktor Orban and President János Éder, to discuss means of strengthening political and economic relations between the two friendly countries, as well as regional and international cooperation and coordination. According to Radi, this is Egypt's second time to take part in the Visegrad Group. That the summit was first in 2017, stressing that demonstrates the keenness of both sides to enhance relations and discuss various issues of mutual interest. Hungary took over the annual presidency of the Visegrad Group, which is composed of Hungary, the Czech Republic, Slovakia and Poland. A few days ago, Minister of Foreign Affairs Sameh Shoukry said Egypt has never relinquished 1 inch of its soil, and likewise it will never give up 1 iota of its territorial waters or its exclusive economic zone during a press conference with the Hungarian Minister of Foreign Affairs and Trade in Cairo. Shoukry added that Egypt has always made it a point to abide in all its international and regional agreements, the international law and the law of sea. Shoukry added that the Egyptian agreements are drawn up in conformity with international law and have never targeted at destabilizing other countries or has been made as part of a unilateral move that disregards international legitimacy. Shoukry expressed his astonishment on repeated Turkish attempts to dictate what Egypt should and should not do. He further stressed that Egypt is and will always be committed to international legitimacy, UN resolutions and international law. Shoukry and the Hungarian counterpart asserted on the strength of relations in several fields. He said Egypt and Hungary signed 2 agreements in the energy field, another one between the Egyptian Institute for Diplomatic Studies and the Hungarian peer.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Starting off our discussion right away, let me welcome my distinguished guest, Dr. Mohammed Fahmy, the Professor of Political Science at the American University in Cairo, and also an expert on Arab affairs. Dr. Fahmy, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, my pleasure.
Dr. Fahmy, now, first off, in Budapest, Hungary, the President is attending the Visegrad summit, and it's the second time the President attends such a summit, which means that the first time around they really valued the presence of Egypt and the President there. Now, there were many things discussed during this time, this summit today. One of the main things, let's break them down. One of the main things, it started off with fighting terrorism and also illegal migration. How effective is it with the participation of Egypt within these countries, Hungary, Slovakia, the Czech Republic and Poland? They're not the usual suspects of the biggest European superpowers, but still they're a very concrete and solid European bloc. The importance of Egypt strengthening the ties with this group.
First of all, thank you for having me. It's very important, and when we look at the composition of the Visegrad Group and the countries that constitute this group, I think it tells us a lot about the nature of their interests These countries, they're all in Central Europe, so they're geographically close to each other. They're all members of the EU and of the NATO as well. So they share a number of objectives, political be it and economic also between them. They're all relatively small countries in terms of size. In terms of economy, they're not the richest countries necessarily, so they also aim at achieving more development. And all of them, prior to the 90s, they were part of the Eastern Bloc. So they all seek to be much closer to change the social and economic fabric that they have been going through for a very long time. So based on these credentials, or on this background, we can analyze the role within the EU, the NATO, and their interest in fostering strong relationship with a country like Egypt in the southern Mediterranean. So these issues that you mentioned are not haphazard or random. So when we talk about something like immigration and the waves of migrants that these countries face, just because of their, again, geographical proximity to both the Middle East and to Western Europe, they act like a gatekeeper for the rest of Europe. And it's no coincidence, again, that in most of these countries we see a rise in the conservative current, the political parties that promote a platform against immigrants, against different cultures, against people from other countries. And so they're quite worried about this. And I think Egypt, for the previous period, has been playing a major role in securing and strengthening the security of the Mediterranean, and by reducing or almost keeping at bay the numbers of the waves of migration that have been flooding Europe from the southern Mediterranean, from northern Africa over the past decade. I think when you look at the numbers, they tell us that Egypt managed to a great extent to secure its northern coast, and in reducing, if not preventing, any kind of threat emanating from that region. So that's the starting point, I would say, or one of the main files.
Yes. Well, what makes Egypt? I mean, Egypt always discusses with many countries, be it in Europe or in Asia or the Americas. They always discuss the issues of fighting terrorism and combating illegal migration. It seems like Egypt is quite experienced or very well trained in dealing with these things. Does Egypt have some sort of a guidebook, some sort of rules or a proper diplomatic way in dealing with this that all the other countries would like to cooperate with Egypt in these files?
I think the issue here is twofold. I mean, you also look at the statements made by the president today regarding the fact that Egypt not only does it keep at bay any kind of risk or threat coming from its northern borders, but also in maintaining good relations with the refugees who are already in Egypt. More than 6 million refugees, according to the latest statistics, and they come from different regions, from southern Africa, from parts in Asia, and several parts around the world. So the fact that Egypt can maintain this kind of level, this kind of security, while also maintaining good ties and hosting these refugees is quite important and quite telling. Egypt, because of its strong security experience in maintaining its borders for decades, we have one of the most treacherous and the most difficult borders in the world, in the Western Desert and the Sinai region, Mediterranean, also southern part with Sudan. The ability to maintain security over these borders for a very long time, having the army also, having the most recent militarization and updates in the security systems within the country, it's also very important that the country can keep and maintain security over its borders. So this definitely played a big role over the past, I would say, maybe 5 years. There is a qualitative difference in the amount of boats and other forms of migration that used to emanate from Egypt. When you compare before and after, there is a big difference. I mean, you can notice the difference from that period and now.
Yes. Well, it seems that over the past few years, everyone was concerned about illegal migration from the whole of North Africa. And now maybe with the developments taking place in Afghanistan, is that also quite a threat?
Yeah, I mean, you have this route of migrants coming from all the way from Central Asia, and you find them, like when you look at the numbers, the nationalities of those who are either arrested or kept in confinement places in the different parts of Italy, Greece, Turkey. You'll find that they come from all over, the Asian continent, from Afghanistan, from Syria, from Iraq, and from even other like Asia Minor countries. So it starts almost from there. But you also have the entire African coast as well, with Central Africa, Western Africa, and the end really of this is not in sight. So it's very important for gatekeepers like Egypt to play this role efficiently by securing their borders and by providing this not really service, but it's a mutually beneficial relationship with European countries.
Yes. Well, talking about services. The summit actually started today, but yesterday Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry met with his Hungarian counterpart Szijjártó, and they were actually talking about the possibility of Egypt exporting gas to Hungary. Now, is this the start of, trying to work and maximize on our findings within the Zohr gas field and trying to penetrate the European market with our gas exports?
Yes, I think that's one of the areas that can be explored further. These countries also have, as we mentioned earlier, they have their aspirations. They want to achieve more development, and they still have a long way to go. But they also have a very strong basis, industrial basis. We have to remember that the Eastern European countries, for a very long time, these were industrial complexes, and they have the potential, the capacity to build industrial experience and to move that forward. So also Egypt has a lot to benefit in that regard. And for a very long time, for instance, Hungarian companies like Gans did play major roles in the water sector, which is one of the sectors that I think were also discussed in these negotiations between Egypt and Hungary. So there is room to be exploited. And it's not one of the usual suspects, like you mentioned earlier, that you'd think of Western European countries. So here we're talking about more competitive, maybe benefits, cheaper prices possibly, but also a great experience in the industrial sector, and this can only be beneficial for a country like Egypt.
How will this reflect on Russia, for instance, because Russia is a very well-known gas producer and exporter to Europe now, Egypt entering the market? How is this going to change the dynamics of the gas market?
I think that we'll have to wait and see to what extent will Egypt be successful in exporting natural gas with greater quantities than is provided by Russia. But we have to also understand that these countries are trying to an extent to, fly away or to escape from this domination of Russia for a very long time. Most of these countries are now more leaning towards Western capitalist systems, and they aspire to be more liberal, more independent. So they really want to, or they are trying to reduce their dependence on Russia. So this will be a leeway, one of the potential options for them to try and diversify their dependency on the energy sector, on Russia in particular.
Yes. Well, what about Egypt? What is it getting out of its participation within the Visegrad summit? Now, you've mentioned that these countries, they're members of NATO, members of the European Union. How can this affect the political weight Egypt might have within both entities?
I think it's very important for Egypt to build, as we have seen over the past few years, diversified sets of relationships with countries of the world, not only of Europe. But when you think of the EU, usually we think of the major European countries that are powerful, such as Germany or France, and it's normal. And you do have to build strong ties with such countries, but also countries like the Czech, Slovakia, Hungary, Poland. These are sizable countries with influence on the decision-making process within the EU, and there is a bit of, maybe I don't want to say similar, but there are shared experiences that Egypt and these countries have had, that for a very long time they were dependent on state-led development models, they were based on socialist systems, and they're trying now to gradually move away from that and to change the dynamics and change the overall structure of their economics and social sectors. So this is something that Egypt can definitely benefit from. These countries can also share their experiences with Egypt. They have a country like today, like Poland, for instance, is one of the emerging economies with great investment opportunities, and having these ties with these emerging markets in Europe and having access, because if you export, if you increase your exports, for instance, to countries like Poland, Hungary, this is also a very important gateway to the rest of Europe. Being part of the EU, you have a free movement of trades and services. So this is also a very important gateway or entry point to the European Union with lesser cost and with maybe a more favorable set of conditions.
Well, would you say that it would be an aim for Egypt to enter these markets more than having these markets enter the Egyptian market? Is it easier to attract foreign investors from these countries than from countries of maybe bigger or more developed economies?
I think one of the features of that these countries still have is the fact that you have major corporations or companies that were previously led by the government and the state, and then that they were privatized. So again, a company like GANS here, I think in the coming period, and also today Egypt mentioned clearly that the country is now considered as poor in terms of water resources, and we've been doing that for a while, but we need more cooperation in that regard. So again, more focus on the water sector, on using the experience and the engines, the machinery of a country like Hungary in that field. I don't think it's very far-fetched, and this is something for us to benefit from, again, at a lesser cost when compared to other German or French maybe, or Belgian products which have been dominating the market for a very long time. That's one example, of course. But again, I think it's important for Egypt to also think in terms of foreign direct investment, not only of major corporations and big brands, but also in terms of sectors, particular sectors that we need to enhance, to provide more employment opportunities for the youth, and to also have more technology exchange, to raise the level of the industrial capacity of the country itself, of Egypt itself. And these countries, again, countries like Poland, Hungary, the Czech and Slovakia can definitely play a big role in that process.
Yes. And ladies and gentlemen, talking about diversifying our resources, the President actually earlier addressed the UN Biodiversity Conference in southwest China at Kunming via video conference. Let's check out this report and we'll be right back. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, continuing our discussion, but now regarding the UN Biodiversity Summit that is taking place in China. The President earlier addressed it today. Now, Dr. Fahmy, Egypt has been really quite vocal and present in terms of sustainable development, green energy, renewable energy, biodiversity, talking about climate change, cutting down on carbon emissions. All of these things, Egypt has been really quite vocal and present and doesn't miss a chance to address or take part in any of these summits. How is Egypt and the President addressing the UN Biodiversity Summit, which actually Egypt hosted the last time around? How's it reflecting on not just the image of Egypt, but also its chances of seriously achieving sustainable development by 2030?
Well, I mean, the issue of the environment, I think, is a very important one that has been, again, like most major global issues, politicized for a very long time. On the one hand, you have developing countries like Egypt calling for and asking for the industrial countries, the more developed countries, to cut down on their carbon emissions and to, take care of the environment that they're accusing the lesser countries or the least developed countries of exploiting and of polluting. And on the other hand, the developed countries, the more powerful ones, are asking of developing and emerging countries like China, like India, to reduce their growth, which is based on, for instance, in the case of China, on coal. In the case of India, it's based on exploiting resources and on more pollution. These are unfortunate outcomes of industrial processes. For the developing countries, they lack the capacity and the resources and the know-how and the technology that would enable them to reduce their emissions and be more friendly to the environment. On the other hand, the more developed countries are not willing to cut down on their emissions. Apart from the lip service that some of them, every now and then, depending on what kind of administration is there. So for a very long time in the US, for instance, under Trump, not a single care in the world about the environment, more emissions, more industrialization. Now we have the Biden administration talking a different language. They still put their money where the mouth is. We'll see if that's going to happen. So you have this sort of polarization between the two camps, and the end result is a global environment that just keep on deteriorating, as we're seeing, in front of our eyes right now. Not in 20 years' time, not in 30 years. Today, we're seeing climate change and its horrible impact on the quality of life and the livelihood all over the world. So for a country like, I think, China today to come out and to talk about the importance of biodiversity and specifying a certain fund for that, I think that's a major policy, I would say, change, because for a very long time China was accused by a lot of countries as one of the main sources of pollution. Egypt, on the other hand, Egypt in the coming months will actually host the Global Summit on the Environment, and that's a very important event for the whole world. And it's an opportunity also for Egypt to play a role in this process, playing maybe more of a broker role, because on the one hand, Egypt is not still as industrialized as other countries are, so our carbon print so far is not that huge. Yes, we have pollution issues in the major cities, in Cairo and in Alexandria, and we have several other issues to do with the environment, but our impact in terms of more pollution or more global warming is not really that massive. So we have a role to play, and we also have the ability, because of our geographical location, because of our strong ties with several countries all over the world, to play a role in this process, play more of a mediator role, a role of the broker that would maybe bridge some gaps and help build ties between the two camps in reaching some sort of an agreement or resolution on it. So hopefully we'll see that materialize in the coming period.
Yes. Well, we are working on having a lot of renewable energy. We're talking about solar energy. We're talking about the oil mountain, Jabal al-Zayt. We're also talking about the wastewater management plants that have been inaugurated recently. Also, three of the biggest power plants in the world, the biggest electrical power plants in the world, talking about desalination, talking about really maximizing on our water resources, having the new delta, the agriculture, all of these things. And as you've mentioned, we are participating in all these environmental summits. Other than being the middleman and bridging these gaps, how can Egypt actually bear the fruits and gain all the benefits from being such a vocal and an active player within this file?
Well, I mean, the potential is huge. Egypt has the biggest reservoir of solar energy in the world, and it's, again, there to be exploited. We will, as a growing country and as a developing country, our needs of energy are only going to get bigger, and we need to maximize, as you mentioned, issues like water desalination or more solar energy, wind energy also, that's another one, another big one on the file. So all of these files are very important, and it's important, I would say critical for Egypt, to be very wary of its environmental footprint, because as a developing country, we're also relatively fragile in terms of the impact that environmental change can have on us. Egypt's not far away from environmental issues. We have the Delta region, which is listed among the most threatened in the world in terms of the rising water levels. So we also have environmental issues that may hamper our ability for development and may also affect the population of Egypt. So by playing an active role, by voicing out your concerns, and by also putting into consideration the environment as one of the major priorities in your developmental plans and policies, you're also planning for the future. You're also working on a more sustainable outcome for developmental projects. So it's important also for Egypt to factor in the environment as one of the main elements of its development. I think it's happening.
Yes. Well, the president also made use and took the chance of actually bringing up the issue of the Ethiopian dam and Egypt wanting to secure its share of the Nile water. I mean, I know it's an issue that we've been talking about and discussing for over a decade now. So where are we from reaching a legal and binding agreement regarding the filling and operation of the dam? Are we getting all the political and international support that we want in this regard? Is Ethiopia still quite firm and stubborn on its stance. Do you see some sort of a light at the end of the tunnel?
Well, I mean, hopefully, we would like to see some light at the end of the tunnel, but the answer to all of your questions, unfortunately, are not affirmative in the sense that any change has happened since last summer. You know, what's happening right now is that Ethiopia is still stalling on its stance. It still refuses to negotiate seriously to reach an agreement. And what Egypt has been doing is that it's been, you know, following all the regular, normal political outlets that it can in order to reach an agreement. You know, forging more support for the Egyptian cause among countries in different parts of the world is very important. So again, bringing up the issue and discussing it with the Central European countries is definitely important. A few days ago, the president held a meeting with Salva Kiir, the president of South Sudan. The issue was also raised. But it's also important, I think, to look at, for example, the statements that were made by the South Sudanese president, and who mentioned that Ethiopia, at the moment, which we know, of course, is going through its own civil war. So there is a great deal of instability within Ethiopia itself, which even makes the Ethiopian president less or more reluctant to sign or to go through a process of negotiations to give concessions at this period of time, because his hands are tied and quite busy with what's going on internally. So it's not expected for Ethiopia, from this sort of stance of weakness, if we will, to give any concessions. But I think it's time for Egypt, and it's a bright moment for Egypt, to increase the international pressure at this stage, to seize the moment in different ways and press Ethiopia, like Ethiopia did with the 2011 revolution, when, of course, things in Egypt were turbulent. And they seized the moment, and they built or constructed the dam with a much fuller speed than it was before. They seized the opportunity. Egypt, at this moment in time, can also seize the opportunity. I think both countries, Egypt was quite lucky. It's a godly sent, maybe, gift that the flood this season was quite high. Egypt did not feel the impact of the second filling because of this, but we cannot really rely on this for the rest of our lives. You know, this is an opportune moment that happened over a certain period in time. Before next year, that's I would say the second or the common endpoint that we need to target to reach this agreement, hopefully.
Yes. Well, ladies and gentlemen, Egypt is also spearheading a lot of efforts in terms of regional stability, talking about Tunisia, Libya, and Syria as well. Let's check out this report and we'll be right back.
President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi is exerting his utmost efforts for the sake of regional stability and security. The head of state had reviewed with Arab and African leaders issues of mutual interest, most notably Palestine, Tunisia, and Libya. Before heading to Budapest to attend the Visegrad summit with Egypt, President al-Sisi has held talks and telephone calls to probe regional issues. He received the special envoy of the President of the Democratic Republic of Congo and the permanent representatives of the DRC to the African Union, Ambassador John Leon Ngonda. The Congolese ambassador delivered a letter to President al-Sisi from the DRC President Felix Tshisekedi, who expressed his deep appreciation for Egypt's diligent support of the DRC during its current chairmanship of the African Union. President Tshisekedi also commended the distinguished relations of friendships and brotherly ties between the two countries, reaffirming his aspirations to continue strengthening their relations across all levels. The meeting also discussed the latest developments in a multitude of issues of common interest in the continent, which represents a priority on the African Union's agenda during the current period. Also, President al-Sisi spoke by phone with the President of Tunisia, Kais Saied, and his Palestinian counterpart, Mahmoud Abbas. President al-Sisi expressed Egypt's support for President Said's efforts and measures aimed at building a better future for the Tunisian people and realizing stability in the country. The President expressed Egypt's full readiness to provide the necessary assistance in this regard in light of the special bonds that the two countries share, with the aim of building a better future for the Tunisian people and achieving stability in the country. For his part, Said expressed appreciation to al-Sisi's kind gesture and confirmed that Tunisia holds in high esteem the close ties and relations it shares with Egypt at the official and popular levels. During the call, Said also congratulated the President on the anniversary of the October War. The Tunisian president added that during the war, the Egyptian army achieved an unprecedented victory and a military miracle by all standards by being able within hours to cross the Suez Canal and cross the Barlef line.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Continuing our discussion with Dr. Fahmy. Being an expert on Arab affairs, I need to ask you about some of the developments taking place now. Let's start off with Tunisia. Tunisia now, President Kais Saied has finally appointed a new government headed by Najla, the first female Prime Minister, Najla Badoune.
Yes.
And they talked about youth, and they talked about really trying to fight corruption and all of these things in this sort of development that's been taking place over the past few months in Tunisia. How successful do you think such a move will be to calm things down in Tunisia?
Well, I mean, first of all, it's a very tough battle that the Tunisian President Kais Saied is facing right now. On the one hand, he has the support of, you'd presume, the majority of the public to these movements. Because for a very long time, for more than 10 years since the uprising, we saw this political instability really affecting the situation in Tunisia. And just like the case in Egypt, people have been fed up with the polemics of the political process and the inability of the political elite to reach any kind of reconciliation or agreement, consensus on how to move forward with the situation in Tunisia. So that's why his statements and his actions were received by a great deal of support from the masses, who are mostly non-politicized, who are mostly seeking better social and economic conditions. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, of course, you have huge resistance from the interests and the powers that reap the benefit of this kind of turmoil, mostly the Nahda party there. And they also are trying to mobilize against his movements. So we see them, waving the flag of street movements. Well, we also have power on the street. And then you reach this level of, again, state of polarization between two sides of the coin. I think it's very important because right now, Saied managed to name the government now and a new cabinet. The next step or the next big question would be the parliament. What is going to happen with the parliament, since he froze the actions of the parliament for a while? Will there be new elections? I think if this happens, and if these elections result in a parliament that is more representative of non-Islamist forces, I think this will be a major winning point for Saied, because then he will have a government that's favorable of his policies and also a parliament that's more supportive of these changes. If that doesn't happen, and we see again a parliament that's polarized or more, witnessing these changes and rifts, I think the political crisis in Tunisia is only going to enhance further in the coming days.
Yes. Well, what about Libya? The parliament actually doesn't have any confidence in the government there, and still Egypt and many international players have really emphasized the importance of having the international and foreign forces and the mercenaries leaving the country. General Khalifa Haftar is now stepping down from his military post and intending to run for office. Now, with all of these developments and the elections slated for December 24th, which is almost in 2 months, is it still feasible for these elections to take place and for the whole political roadmap to peacefully happen?
I think this will have to depend on what happens between now and Christmas Eve. That's when the elections are going to take place. And again, what's happening in Libya, because of the fragility of the situation there, that it's pretty much affected by the agreements and the kind of concessions given on the regional level between the major players, Turkey, Egypt, to an extent also countries like Algeria, who do have a stake in Libya, and of course Europe, Italy, France, other major powers. If there is a collective will and agreement among these players that we can reach some kind of concession or consensus on how to move forward, then there's a chance of holding the elections. If not, the elections, I don't think, will happen as expected. It's very important for these elections to happen and happen fairly and freely and result in a government that's acknowledged and recognized both from within the Arab world and also internationally, because this is the only way to move forward. But if the rifts keep on increasing, there are forces there that if they feel, like the mercenaries you mentioned, like the foreign fighters, if they sense that the elections will result in a government or a political system that's not friendly to their aspirations, they're very well expected to try and sabotage these elections by terrorist actions, by increasing the level of tension within the country and other, tools. So, if there is some sort of an agreement between the major players before the actual elections, then they may take place. But if not, if the escalation keeps on going, then we might end up again with another political crisis in Libya.
Well, hopefully that doesn't happen, and hopefully the elections would take place in Libya. But as Dr. Fahmy has mentioned, in 2 months' time, a lot of developments are expected to take place there, not just in Libya, but all over the Middle East and North Africa region. Unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, that's all the time we have for this edition of the Daily Debate. But before we go, I'd like to thank my very distinguished guest, Dr. Mohammed Fahmy, the Professor of Political Science at the American University in Cairo, and also the expert on Arab affairs. Dr. Fahmy, always a pleasure having you with us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, please stay tuned for more coming up on Nile International. I'm Hani Saif. Thank you for joining us.